Hello and welcome back to the podcast. For those of you who are new, my name is Rennie. I go by Just Riri Shop online, and I I'm gonna just jump right in because something has been really heavy on my heart that I have been really reluctant to talk about, and I just want to put a trigger warning before we get into today's video slash podcast. I'm going to be talking about some aspects. I won't go into depth out of, just respect for others, but childhood abuse and specifically sexual assault and sexual abuse. This is something that I have been working through and trying to heal by myself with little to no support for a long time. And with everything that's going on right now, with the news cycle in particular, with the Epstein case, I have just felt it so heavy to start to share a little bit more about my experiences and how I've been navigating healing that specific aspect of my recovery. And for a little bit more context, for those of you who are just finding me or seeing me for the first time, on this podcast, I've been talking mostly about my experience recovering with very little support or navigating like the mental health care system. As someone who was formerly diagnosed with bipolar disorder and then re-diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and depression. And more recently, I've just gotten other opinions that suggest that I could be autistic or just a plethora of things. But for sure, what I think at least all of the therapists and psychiatrists I've spoken to agree on is that I have trauma, specifically complex trauma rooted in childhood abuse. And I've touched on some of the abuse that I faced. I've touched on some parts of my story, but I've really been feeling strongly on my heart called to share more, even though it's really difficult for me. Um, and it's specifically because I feel like right now, with everything that's going on in the news, what I'm not seeing and what's bothering me a lot is that the voices of survivors and the voices of those who have firsthand experience, navigating and healing from sexual abuse or sexual assault of any kind, they're not being centered. And it's really frustrating. And I think that this case is a prime example of why so many people, but specifically women and girls, suffer in silence and never speak out and never say anything because a lot of the rhetoric that like was fed to me from like my upbringing and also what I, feel like the society kind of says without saying is nothing will come of it. And to be honest, a lot of times nothing comes of it. Like I don't want to say it's not pointless, but it can feel to a survivor like there's too much to lose and not enough to gain because our society really villainizes victims and protects abusers. And we're seeing that. Like we have people who are literal predators that are in positions of power. And it's like, how do you expect people to feel safe in a society where we quite literally don't believe victims and we villainize victims, let alone like get support to heal, because I think the way that I've seen people speak about this. It's kind of like the best you can hope for is that you can become stable enough to live a typical normal life, right? Like go to therapy, take medicine, and just hope for the best and never talk about it, essentially. And honestly, there's so much guilt and shame around it, and because there's so little support, and because like so many victims are villainized, it's really hard to talk about these things. I have been struggling for most of this year about sharing what I've been dealing with internally. Um, and really the only reason I'm doing it now is because I just know that there are probably other people out there who are going through the same thing right now. And this is a very triggering time. And I feel like um, I've been talking a lot about healing and all the highs and lows. And I feel like this is the one thing that I feel like I continuously gloss over because it's so difficult to talk about. But without going too in depth, I do just want to share a little bit about my experiences. So I grew up in the rural South, and I did not have either of my parents with me during my formative years. I mentioned this in previous podcast episodes before, but my mom was incarcerated when I was a young child, and my father was absent for most of my life, and then he passed away during my teen years. I only met him once, so he was absent for the majority of my life. And I was raised by my grandma, my elderly grandma, and there was a point in my life where it was just my elderly grandma and her partner, who I refer to as my grandpa. And we had like relatives occasionally who would come in. You know, I had like older siblings, and so I did experience abuse very early in life to the point to where my brain repressed a lot of the memories of it. And I only started to have these memories, repressed memories surface. It started honestly at the onset of like my mental health issues worsening, which makes sense. And it kind of is part of the reason why I feel compelled to talk about it now, because I feel like I've been leaving that out, even though it's a big part of how I fell into a deep depression and started to experience all the mood fluctuations. And so I actually started experiencing early on in like 2019 when these things started to surface and I started to have episodes and I didn't know what was going on. I was having like regress memories surface, but I didn't know that that's what was happening. And so I remember my ex-husband, my partner at the time, telling me in one of my episodes that I was crying, asking for my grandma, and just like screaming and asking for my grandma. And my grandma passed away when I was a teenager. And so one thing that stood out to me was just him saying that I just sounded like a child. And this happened in other scenarios later, like years later as well, where I would go into these kind of episodes. And now I understand that I was regressing. Like I was experiencing like age regression, which is really something that some survivors, particularly those who've experienced like it really early in life or have it repressed or it's just so far in their psyche, might experience that, like returning back to that place. And specifically for me, I would have episodes or kind of go into these disassociative states, where I was either age regressing or I was like lashing out or I was just like completely uncontrollably crying. Um, and it was usually tied to a trigger, but half the time I didn't really know, at least early on, what was really triggering me. So now I know that if I hear like a child crying, at that particular place when I was having that, there was a child that I literally felt was being abused. And so I actually tried to go and find and try to go get like support because I would hear them screaming and crying and their parents like fighting with them all the time. And that was really triggering for me as someone who's been through all of the forms of abuse. So now I know that like children crying, but also like any type of sexual intercourse was triggering. And I wasn't aware of that either because for most of my life I was hypersexual, to be honest. So like I wasn't even aware because I thought me being hypersexual meant I was fine with it, but really I was being triggered all the time without even realizing it. And honestly, I was disassociating a lot during those types of any type of intercourse without even realizing it. So these are just some of the things that started to come up for me and I wasn't really understanding it. And I feel like it was kind of honestly glossed over, even when I was like actively seeking support, going into the mental health care system. I feel like the focus was more so on um, understanding my behaviors, but I don't feel like for me personally, they were really interested in really exploring the root or I don't know. So my experience early on was really confusing because it was like I was experiencing all these symptoms and because they were intensifying to the point to where it was causing harm to myself and others, the focus was more so on my behaviors than it was on understanding like what is causing the behaviors or like what it's rooted in. And so exploring the trauma more in depth is only something that was brought up in recent years. And it's been really hard because I've had my struggles with traditional therapy, as I talked about, but I digress. Um, I experienced abuse as a young child by multiple people. Um, there are some that I don't fully remember, but there are, and this happened by adults, but there are like instances or like inappropriate situations that I do remember being in with them. that wasn't necessarily the abuse, but it was inappropriate enough for me to kind of know that that's what happened, even though my brain won't let me fully experience or remember it, if that makes sense. It might not make sense, but if you are someone who's experienced it, this might make sense to you. And that's been really confusing because for so long I was kind of just in denial and was just like, no, no, this didn't happen. But everything else, like I had all the other symptoms of it and the situations surrounding it that I did remember, I just kind of shrugged off because I didn't have a normal childhood anyway. Like there was always a lot of dysfunction and chaos and violence and grief and just a lot of things happening in my childhood. So I just thought, I don't really remember specific things happening, so it must not have been that bad. But there were some things that would happen, like being shown inappropriate things as a child by like grown adult men, for example, that I do remember, that I'm like, okay, well, that actually just makes sense. And there were other things too that I struggled with. Like as a child, I wet the bed all the time up until a certain point when somebody wasn't there. And also, I experienced a lot of abuse from other children. And I actually didn't consider this to be abuse until recently. I only more recently found out about this. And in my mind, I was just thinking, kids just copy what they see or what they've experienced. And so, as an adult, I've even struggled to kind of work through this because I don't have any ill feelings around it because in fact, I feel more like empathy because like I said, I really believe that kids just copy what they experienced. But I did experience this by multiple kids throughout my childhood. And yeah, and so for most of my life, was just very hypersexual from the time that I was extremely young until, up until I got like married for the first time. I was just extremely hypersexual. And I never really understood it, but it was like a compulsion. Like I struggled with porn addiction for most of my childhood and most of my adolescence and most of my life essentially. And moving to California where I now live, a lot of the things that was worsening, that was kind of coming to a head, were really normalized here, especially like in the places where I lived. I used to live in San Francisco, so I feel like there were certain things that um, I kind of took on this persona of being like empowered in my sexuality, and I'm not at all saying that that's a bad thing because I do think that working through and healing the shame is such an important part of recovery for sexual abuse survivors. But for me, I actually was not addressing a lot of my trauma directly because I was using being sexually empowered as kind of like a scapegoat for a long time. And when I like went through my first divorce, um, I really took that on strongly. And I feel like a lot of the things that I was into, specifically sexually, was rooted in trauma. It was very harmful and very, I'm realizing only recently, not actually things that I really fully like, but it was a lot of the things that I thought that I liked was rooted in trauma because a lot of the sexual things that I was exposed to was not consensual early on. So, anyway, I digress. But I want to talk a little bit about how I've been trying to heal through and work through all of these things coming up, and specifically how I'm trying to process and stay grounded with everything that's going on right now. Um, but I'll start by saying this is the first time that I've openly ever even said any of this stuff out loud. And to know that I'm putting this out for strangers feels very uncomfortable. And I just want to validate that for other people who've experienced it, it's not like I am struggling to articulate myself so much right now. It's not easy to talk about because people really don't respect victims, or it's something that you can't really understand. Honestly, you can't unless you've experienced it yourself. And um it's really hard to talk about because I just feel like I'm kind of disassociating right now. That's how difficult of a time I'm having talking about this. I feel like right now, especially, it's important to be sharing this because there are so many people who I know have gone through these things. The reality of it is that like we're surrounded by people, we're surrounded by women and girls and men as well and boys as well. We are surrounded by survivors and we have no idea. And people are suffering in silence. And when people do have the courage to speak up, because like I said, there's nothing to gain from it. So it's really hard to talk about it because it really feels like there's nothing to gain from it. And the only reason why a victim would ever speak up, in my opinion, is one, for their own healing, and two, to help other people, to make sure other people don't feel alone, or if they could prevent other people from experiencing it, advocating in that way. And I feel like right now I'm not seeing any, not any, but like very few people are centering the voices of survivors right now and what I'm seeing in the news. And I work in PR and media relations, so I have to read the news. And I'm not seeing them centering the voices of survivors, and it's part of the reason why I feel called to share today. But I wanted to say that this is something I know is, for me personally, tied to a generational wound, and no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to talk about it. I don't feel like I have support when it comes to, reaching out to relatives and talking about it because I've tried. And I feel like the way that we, especially in the Black community, my experience has been anyway, like you leave the past in the past, right? Or you don't tell people your business, or like there's all these things that honestly aren't healthy. It's not healthy and it should not be normalized. And part of the reason why I feel called to share is because I feel compelled to break this generational wound in my own lineage, and also because I know that there's so many other women and girls and boys and families and people out there who are also going through the same thing and also might resonate with that. It could be also generational. It could be something that has happened to multiple people in your lineage and no one talks about it. And that's a problem. And I also feel like because we don't talk about it, it's really hard to know what the recovery process really looks like. I feel like everything that I see talking about recovery is super surface level, and you're kind of just expected to only talk about it directly in therapy. And I'm someone that's been in and out of therapy, all forms of therapy, and I've done even like peer support groups and inpatient, outpatient. I personally find that it's just the most helpful to hear from other people who've been through similar things or been through, hey, people who can understand. Like, I feel like for me, it's helpful to hear directly from other people who've been through similar things. But even then, it's such a difficult topic to talk about because there's so much shame and guilt that I feel like it can be hard to really honestly talk about how difficult it is. For me personally, I've always struggled with relationships, particularly relationships with men. And it's not like I could outright say, oh, I have a fear of men and it's because I'm a survivor. I feel like that's, in an ideal world, that would be nice, to be able to voice that and feel supported and feel safe enough to do so. But I don't feel like that is the case. I don't feel like we live in a society where we feel we can be that honest about it. And honestly, I feel like the partners I've had, because I myself haven't understood how to navigate this, I myself have been confused and going through all the ups and downs, especially as someone who's experienced it early in life. And so I don't even, there's the added issue of like denial that comes with that too. Um, it's been really hard to navigate relationships, particularly with men. I'm also attracted to women, but it's been really hard to navigate with men. And I think right now, this particular moment is very triggering because we are all, I think, not all of us, but many of us are hyper aware of just the negative impacts of the patriarchy. And I can't talk about these things without getting political. And if that bothers you, then I'm so sorry. But like everything in life is political because we live in systems and they do impact our daily life. If you don't feel it, it's because you're probably benefiting from it. So I can't not talk about it because it does impact every single person, whether they realize it or aware of it or not. But anyway, I digress. Um, we are aware, most of us, those of us who read and are educated for the most part, are aware of the negative impact of patriarchy. And it's really difficult to know just how many predators and people who have caused harm, most of whom, from what I can see, are men. It's hard to watch them rise into these positions of power and leadership. And meanwhile, victims everywhere are suffering in silence. And it's like, even those who try to speak out, even those who try to go get support, it's really rare that there's adequate justice served. So it's kind of, it feels to a lot of people like there's nothing you can do, there's no consequences for it. And then even the whole process of healing, it's so difficult. Um, there's a lot of money and time and energy that goes into even having the access to support, whether it's mental health resources or whatnot. And then even then, it's really difficult. It's difficult to find the right provider. It's difficult to find the right modality that actually really works. It's difficult to find any type of stability if you are someone who's experienced this. Um, and for much of my life, I lived in survival mode. And a big part of what I've been talking about on this podcast and a big part of my recovery has been, you know, learning to regulate my nervous system so that I can actually learn emotional regulation because I've struggled with emotional regulation for so long. And I just couldn't allow myself to accept all of the experiences that I had that contributed to that. And this was a big one that I wasn't addressing. I was ignoring it until honestly recently when I feel like I didn't really have a choice because it came to a head. Like it was just coming up and I feel like it was destroying a lot of things in my life, like my behaviors, and I wasn't addressing it. And so I was lashing out specifically at men. A lot of the episodes that I had that are classified now under the umbrella of like my BPD, a lot of the splitting, and for those who don't know what that is, like black and white thinking. So I had like petulant type, meaning I was very violent and very like verbally abusive. And um, this was really, really specifically aimed at men. I did have situations like this with friends who are women, but for the most part, it was aimed at men. Like I feel like the worst came out with men, in particular, those who I was attracted to any type of way, like sexually or romantically. Like I always lash out at men if I find them attractive at some point because it's connected to my trauma. And because I wasn't addressing it for so long, it was like it's gonna come out at some point, one way or another, even if I wasn't understanding that that's what it was connecting to. And um, I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but it's like hard for me to think clearly as I'm talking about these things. But what I've been really trying to focus on is staying grounded and learning to regulate my nervous system. And some of the things that have been helping me lately, because I can do a whole different episode potentially if I can, just kind of laying out like what this has looked like over the years. But recently, with everything that's going on, regulating my nervous system and staying grounded has been so important for me. I will say though, for those who are more, if you are like newly processing this, if this is recent and you are more in crisis mode, support is so important. And what's really tough is that we don't all have that. I know for me, I don't come from like wealth, and I also don't come from like a family of like I don't have support like that. So I've had to quite literally construct that, build that, and find that. And it's hard for me because this can be really isolating. And I think a lot of those who experience this don't feel safe in the world. And so we can hermit, like I am a homebody. I don't like to leave the house. I've been forcing myself to go out and find community. I honestly thank God that COVID happened and there's so many more virtual community spaces, but I've been really pushing myself to go out and connect with other people. And I'm really grateful that in the past year or so, I have been able to find some communities that do make me feel safe. And it's not like I'm openly sharing my trauma in these spaces, but I feel like I'm finding people through these spaces that I can trust enough to really talk to. And that's so important because if you don't feel like you have family or you don't feel like you have that support, um, I really just want to encourage those of you who feel like you're alone and you don't have anyone. I promise you, from someone like me who's been alone and navigated much of literally all of this, honestly, by myself, and someone who doesn't have family lives like thousands of miles away from my hometown and have not been home for like almost a decade. Um, like I've had to go through much of this life by myself and I've had to deal with a lot of this by myself or with little support or with people who just don't get it, who just don't understand or don't know what to do or how to support. Or honestly made things worse. But I'll talk about that at a different time. But take it from me when I say, like, you might not believe it's possible to find people who get you and understand you and want to be there for you, people who really make you feel safe, but they are out there. And honestly, it's part of the reason why I felt compelled to even start to open up about this and even like share. And I haven't shared a lot because it's hard, honestly. But I just want those who are struggling to know that they are not alone. And community coming together with other people who have experienced this and understand it and are trying to willingly heal through it and want to hold space and want to talk about it is, oh, it's just, I feel like it's so imperative. It's so important. And I really encourage you to seek that out. Like, even if it's just Googling support groups nearby or different organizations that offer support group for survivors, or I promise you it's going to be really weird at first. It really will, but it's going to be worth it. The peer-to-peer support groups that I joined when I was like in crisis, full crisis, like in and out of mental hospital, the peer support groups that I joined during that time honestly saved my life because I there are some moments, and I think anyone who's gone through this, you probably have been there. And I'm also a suicide attempt survivor. So I've had those moments where I didn't feel like I could go on, like I just felt like the pain that I felt was never going to go away. And this is connected to all of the things that I experienced, but specifically, this was like something I couldn't even allow my brain to address. Like, I couldn't even address it because I already had all this other stuff that was going on too. And, like I've been there. I've been to the point where it's like there's no point in trying to even find support or build friendships or find community or talk to people about it or try to explain myself. It's no point. There's no point. Like I've been there more times than I can count. And it's just not true. It's just not true. And I've recently been a part of communities and groups where I have never felt more seen or safe. And I didn't even believe, for most of my life, I didn't believe that that was possible. And so I just want to encourage those of you who might be feeling hopeless and alone and like there's no point in even trying to find someone to talk to about this. There are people out there. There are so many people. There are so many survivors. There are so many people. The more that I started opening up, it honestly breaks my heart. I have yet to find one space where if I even talked about any form of abuse that I experienced, because I've experienced a lot of different forms of abuse, I have yet to find a space where there wasn't at least one other person who had been through something like that. And that it breaks my heart. It's so common. It's so common. Odds are you know someone or multiple people who have experienced this and they just have never talked about it openly. Some people go their entire lives and never tell anyone. And I completely understand why. But my point is to say is that you are not alone. And I feel like the more we come together and get it out. For me, I'm a spiritual person, so it's an energy. For me, a big part of my healing has been ancestral because I know that this is something that is tied to my lineage. I know that there are women for generations and generations and generations back that have experienced this, going all the way back to when my ancestors were first forced here. So it's a lot, it's deep. This is deep wounding, and I feel like it's honestly really sad that we feel that we have to figure it out alone and that we have to heal in silo and that we can only show our faces if we are okay, as if like we should be okay when we experience things like this that are horrific that no one should ever have to go through. Um, but anyway, I really was hoping to share actual things that have been helping me in hopes that it could help other people. And so community. Community is a big one. Grounding practices. I am at the point now, I used to be at the point where I couldn't meditate. Or I guess my mindset around meditation has expanded and I feel like I have a deeper understanding of what that means. But for a long time, like I have very obsessive compulsive thoughts. I get into these thought spirals and loops and I can't stop. I fixate on things and it's just persistent. I don't feel like my brain is ever really quiet, but I have been practicing for years now mindfulness and meditation. And I actually started, well, I was forced to do it in a mental hospital, but that's neither here or there. But when I actually took it upon myself to start practicing meditation and mindfulness, I actually started by just taking bubble baths frequently. And now this is very much connected to like my womb healing practices. But I started taking like bubble baths and I would practice mindfulness by just staring at the bubbles. And anytime thoughts would creep in, because for so long my brain was just full of negative thoughts, negative self-talk. And as someone who's been diagnosed with a number of different mental illnesses, I've also experienced a number of like auditory hallucinations throughout most of my life. So I would hear voices, I would hear things, and I couldn't shut it up, and it would drive me crazy. So I would just practice staring at the bubbles, and then anytime my mind would go, into these spirals, I would remind myself, like, just the bubbles, just look at the bubbles, just look at the bubbles, like compulsively over and over. I'd be like, just look at the bubbles, focus on the bubbles. And it took a long time. It took years. I feel like I first started doing this in like 2020, and now I genuinely know how to silence my mind. It blows my mind that I've gotten to this point, but it really is a practice. And so whenever I feel like the noise is too loud, especially like if you are someone that's on social media, if you are someone that's reading the news, if you are someone that's like witnessing everything that's happening, which is so triggering, or if you are in environments that don't feel safe or supportive, which is also triggering, um, being able to practice being centered, it's really hard, but it's worth even trying to make the effort to get there because now I can meditate for like 30 minutes and I never thought I would be able to do that. Like I literally, my brain does not stop. So even when I am meditating for 30 minutes, it's not that my brain is just silent. That's not the case. Like there are things happening. It's just that I've learned to not attach so much to it. Like I've learned to not attach so much emotion to it and to just kind of objectively observe what's happening in my mind when it comes up. A lot of times doing this, I feel like I've received a lot of clarity and messages that have actually allowed me to deepen my healing and deepen my understanding of like how this has impacted me and how this wounding has shown up in all other aspects of my life because it had for so long. Like I didn't feel like I had an identity. I didn't feel like I knew who I was. And for most of my life, I was self-loathing. It's literally, I feel like this is the first year of my entire life where I genuinely feel like I love myself. That is a big deal. I feel like for most of my life, I carried so much shame and self-hatred, and I didn't understand why. I didn't understand why. And I know that this is something that other people, survivors and none, like whether you're a survivor or not, I think there's so many people who can relate to that. And learning to center and ground myself was the first step in like really allowing myself to kind of detach from these thoughts that were constantly in my head, these negative thought spirals that I would go in. Also, like the times when I would kind of disassociate and be back into those experiences, right? Um, so like learning to ground myself and center myself, going outside more because I am a homebody and I for so long didn't feel safe in the world. Like it's such a nervous system reset to find spaces. And for me, as someone who is more introverted and still doesn't, is still learning to trust people and to feel safe in public, especially when there are places where there's a significant amount of men present, which is something I still struggle with. Um, I have had to find places that are more like secluded, but I really recommend like kind of finding a space outside if you can. I know it's not possible for everybody, but finding like your own space outside. And so there are like specific spaces throughout my recovery that I would go to regularly where it would be really secluded and I felt safe enough to really, journal and write and reflect in those spaces. And it was very grounding. It was very grounding to like, I live in California now, so like go to the beach or go out into like one of the parks, and just be off in like my own little corner somewhere. Um, those are things that I've been trying to implement more frequently. But also just like parenting myself in like the little ways. I am a mom, and so now it's kind of like, what would I do for my child, right? I have a child who's on the autism spectrum, and it's like I want to, like no matter how old he gets, I just want to baby him. And there are moments when it's important for me to tend to my own inner child, especially as someone who experienced a lot of my abuse very early in life. I, for years of my life, watched like only kid movies, and I didn't understand why. I actually didn't understand why. And this was actually the years leading up to when I started to have like age regression episodes and things. I literally only watched like Disney Pixar movies for like years, like Barbie movies and Disney Pixar movies. And I feel like I kind of like went up in ages. Like I would like the movies I was watching was kind of reflective of like the ages that I was healing through, if that makes sense. And I feel like more recently I've been in like my teenage years. I've been like re revisiting movies that I liked as a teenager. Thank you that I'm a millennial and I kind of was going through adolescence in the 2000s, which is, oh, there's so much good like movies and films and just things that I can reflect on that just really bring me so much joy. And even in those moments when, for much of my life, I couldn't look back and see anything that I was grateful for, I was only like reflecting on the painful moments. Now I'm able to remember because I've been like intentionally doing this inner child healing, things that really did bring me joy. Like I started coloring again a couple years ago, um, because I loved to color as a child, and it was something that I forgot that I loved to do. I forgot until I started again. I actually only started again because when I was first institutionalized, they made us do the first mental hospital, or I should say the second mental hospital I went to was really nice, and they had like a little art room and they made us do art. They made us color, they made us paint. And for me now, I realize that having something tactile, like I have my little booby stress ball here, um, is really regulating for me. So coloring, which is something I loved as a child, crafts, like doing things like that to nurture that inner child, and things that also regulate my nervous system. I can't stress enough, though, how important it is to do somatic work. I will really, really push this to the grave. Um, as I've continued to kind of navigate my healing and switching from Western, because I started in like the Western to more like connecting with ancestral means of healing. For me, I felt like that's what works, but I always suggest people do what works for them. Um, Somatic movement, I come from an African lineage, so moving of the hips, shaking of the hips, like in our community there's a lot of dance movements that we do that revolves the butt and the hips. And it's funny because people have made so many jokes about it, but Black women especially carry a lot of wound trauma. We have a lot of wound trauma. And so shaking your hips, moving your butt, moving your hips, you are literally you're releasing that. I truly believe because I've experienced firsthand how healing somatics can be. So whether it's acupuncture, and I know that's expensive, acupuncture was really helpful for me. In fact, I feel like a lot of the repressed memories started to surface because I was consistently doing acupuncture for a while, and my nervous system and my body felt safe enough to allow these things to come up. Because I have been in a disassociated state for so long, and I've talked about that in previous episodes. So these types of modalities have been really grounding for me. Um, like temperature therapy. So I know people do like cold plunges and things like that. Me personally, I just started with just taking cold showers, or putting like ice cubes on my vagus nerve. Sound healing has been really regulating for me. And dance, I'm a dancer. I quite literally just came from a dance class before filming or recording this. And specifically like hip opening exercises like yin yoga that specifically focuses on the hips. I I have noticed this in myself and also other people who've experienced anything like this is that there's a lot of tightness in the hips. It's hard to open the hip space. And so doing stretches, like you'll notice that if you've ever tried any of these things and you've experienced and you're a survivor, you will cry, you will purge. I call it purging. Like a lot of these emotions will come up. Like every time I would go to acupuncture, almost every time, I would cry. Like I would cry every time because there was so much that would come up. When I started doing like the shaking somatics or even the EFT tapping, if that's something that like you've heard of, I encourage you all to really research these, and I can put some of these in the description too. But doing any of that, like tapping, acupuncture, even like certain massages, movement, dancing, shaking, yoga, oftentimes I would cry. These emotions would just come up naturally. And even if you feel mentally like you've worked through it and you're not ruminating on it, this gets held in your body. It gets held in your body. And that's why, for me, there would be times when certain touches, certain things would trigger it. And I didn't understand. Like, me having sexual intercourse was triggering me so much. Like for years, even with partners that I was committed to, married to, would cry after. Sometimes I wouldn't even tell them or show them. I would just like go to the bathroom and cry. But like I would cry after, and I didn't understand why I was doing that. Like I didn't understand it. Um, but a lot of this is trapped and stored in the body. And so I can't stress enough how important somatic is, and it's so much of that is connected to nervous system regulation because when you've experienced anything that's traumatic, but especially something that is just deeply connected to the womb and your body in that way, it's energy. Like it's stored there. The feeling, the fear, the shame, the guilt, it's stored there, and you have to do something to release it. And I really encourage people to find support in that process of doing that because it's not easy to purge, as I like to call it. It's not easy to release this energy, to release these emotions, to release and move through it. It's extremely difficult. I feel like I've been doing this in increments for years, and there are people who spend their entire lives trying to heal from these things. And I really, if there's anything that anyone is watching or listening to this takes away, especially if you are someone who isn't a survivor, but you're trying to provide support, is that these things are, in my opinion, deep spiritual wounds. It's not something that just goes away. It's not something someone should just get over. It's not something you can't just get over. You can't just get over this type of invasive abuse. So, have grace with yourself if you're struggling through the process. If you're like, oh, it's been so many years and I just still can't, that's normal. This is like a deep core spiritual wound, genuinely. There's energy connected to this. This is how I feel anyway. And I know not everyone views it through this perspective, right? But this is how I view it. And I feel like I found the most healing in acknowledging that this is energy. I need to release it in every way possible. So voicing it, finding community, movement, nervous system regulation, grounding exercises. These are just some things, but I think most importantly, finding the support in whatever way that looks like for you, whatever feels calling to you, whatever's calling to you. So I really hope that um, those of you who have experienced this and you're going through this, that you do find spaces and people that you trust that you can talk to. And if you don't feel like you have that, please know that they are out there. I'm going to try my best to do some research and put in like my Substack some different resources for survivors because I really want those who are struggling, especially right now, to know that you are not alone. And this is so common and so many people have gone through this. It's terrible, but so many people have gone through this, and there is support out there because for so long I felt like that just wasn't the case, and it's just simply not true. There is so much support out there. It's not always easy to find, and especially if you're like going through it, you're in the pits of it, and you're isolated, and you're having trouble trusting and having trouble reaching out or speaking out because it's extremely hard to do. It's extremely hard to do. And I just want to validate that you are not alone and you deserve support and you deserve to be held and seen and to feel safe. You deserve that. And I hope that you find that. Um, and I really encourage those of you who are on social media or in the news, please take breaks. Please take breaks and unplug. I do feel like it's our responsibility to be informed, especially now. But at the same time, like you need to take care of yourself because there's no way you can show up for yourself, for others, for the world, for the community if you're not okay. Um, we always talk about like make sure your cup is full and put your gas mask on first. It's cliche, but it's important to know that you do need to take care of yourself. So I encourage you to please take breaks because unfortunately we're still not in the place where we know how to really hold space for victims. I feel like we're making strides. And I say that reluctantly because I feel like we still have a long, long way to go. But the reason I say we're making strides is because I do feel like there is support and I do feel like there are more people talking about it now, which I hope that we continue to go down a direction of really knowing how to hold space for victims rather than demonizing them. And I really hope that I can see at some point in my lifetime a day when people are truly held accountable for these types of atrocities. And so other victims and people who've experienced this feel that they can speak out, that they can talk about it. Um, but okay, I feel like I high key disassociated through a lot of this, and so I don't even know how this turned out. But if you stayed up until now, I'm very thankful for you. Thank you so much because I'm really out of it right now. And this has been hard. I am nearly fully disassociated right now, I'm not gonna lie. I'm aware of it because I've been healing for a long time, and so I've become like aware of these patterns. But I'm like fully feeling like I'm just hearing myself talking, like fully out of body right now. So I need to ground myself. But thank you so much for listening to this podcast or watching this if you're on YouTube. And I truly am sending all of you who are struggling so much love. Um, and yeah, I'm gonna leave it there. But if you do want to hear more about my healing journey and how I've been working through all of this and more, because there is more, then you're welcome to follow. No pressure. No pressure at all. This is not my job. It's just something I do as a passion. So, um, yeah, I'm sending you love. And until next time, take care.